She was the woman they blamed, the woman they broke, the woman they thought would stay silent forever. But when the lie that destroyed her life begins to crack, she comes back colder, smarter, and more dangerous than anyone remembers. In a world built on betrayal, money, and beautiful deception, one truth can burn everything down. And this time, she's not asking for justice, she's making them pay.
Chapter 1. The Rainy Night Before the Wedding. On the night before her wedding, rain poured over the city as if someone had tipped a bucket of ice water across the sky. From the 12th floor window of Tang Tin Corporation, Ha On-yen watched the crooked streams crawl down the glass, then lowered her eyes to the leather case at her feet. Inside were the budget files for the Minjiang mixed-use project, the same files she had checked 3 times that evening. The next morning she was supposed to walk into the grandest hotel in the city in a white dress and marry Tren Kai-zui. Yet here she still was, alone in the office, because her father had said something years ago that had never stopped echoing inside her. Before you become anyone's wife, you still have to answer for your own name. Thinking of him softened her face for a moment. Ha Van Kui had spent most of his life as an internal accountant at Tang Tin, the kind of man who smoothed every receipt flat before putting it away, as if order itself were a form of dignity. Her mother had vanished after a traffic accident in another province many years earlier, lost to rumor, paperwork, and the kind of absence that never fully becomes grief because nobody can say for certain whether death or life is on the other side of it. Father and daughter had survived together in a damp little house at the end of a narrow alley. This year, against all odds, Ha On-yen had been promoted to a specialist position reviewing bidding documents, and tomorrow she was supposed to begin a brighter life. Kai-zui had once seemed to embody that promise. He was handsome, measured, respected inside the company, a lead architect with calm hands and a voice that never rose. Years ago he had stood beside her on a wind-beaten construction site, laced his fingers through hers, and told her that one day he would build her a home with a balcony facing the river. Her closest friend, Lei Tu-vi, had even messaged twice that night to tell her to leave the office and sleep early so she would look perfect in the morning. Everything should have felt like a beginning. Her phone vibrated just before 11. "Are you still at the office?" her father asked. His voice carried the soft hum of the old fan at home and the rain outside his window. "Yes, I'm locking the data room and heading out. You should sleep first." There was a pause. Then he spoke more slowly than usual. "On-yen, if anything strange happens tonight, do not believe what they are trying to make you see." She straightened. "What do you mean?" "Nothing yet. Just come home. The expense ledgers for Minjiang don't match. We'll deal with it after the wedding." He ended the call before she could ask more. A chill went through her. She turned toward the electronic archive room. The sensor light in the corridor flickered once, as if someone else in the building had not gone home at all. She set down the case and turned her computer back on. The consolidated bidding file from Minjiang was still inside the internal secure drive. She checked the access history. 10 minutes earlier, a hidden administrator account had entered the folder. The screen displayed only an encrypted string of characters. Her brows drew together. Before she could investigate further, the office door flew open. Tu-vi rushed in, breathless, her umbrella dripping. "Oh good, you're actually still here. I called." "What are you doing here?" "I passed by the hotel and thought I'd bring your wedding necklace. Kai-di said he'd be busy receiving guests tomorrow morning and might forget." She set a velvet box on the desk. She was still beautiful, but there was something in her eyes that night, something unsettled, evasive, already standing half inside another story. Before On-yen could ask anything else, a sharp alarm burst from the server system. Red letters flashed across her monitor. "Data copied to external device." Both women froze. Footsteps thundered in the corridor. The project director, security staff, and Ta Kain-fong, the vice president in charge of investment, a polished young man who smiled the way some people displayed expensive knives, stormed into the room. "Who accessed the files?" he demanded, his gaze falling on On-yen first. "It wasn't me," she stood. "I was checking the access history, and then—" One of the security staff pulled a silver USB drive from the side of her computer. "Sir, an external device was connected to Miss Ha's machine." "That's impossible!" Her voice sharpened. "That isn't mine." Kain-fong let out a small, cold laugh. "How convenient. A sealed tender file is copied just before final submission, and the device happens to be connected at your computer." At her side, Tu-vi tightened her fingers around her handbag strap. "Tan-yen, when I came in, you were alone." The sentence struck like a precise blade. On-yen turned toward her in disbelief. "You think I did this?"
I don't know, but when I arrived, I saw only you. In less than 20 minutes, the rumor had outrun the truth. The copied file, the USB drive, the hidden login, the timing before the bidding seal, everything had been arranged into a story that pointed in one direction only. By midnight, she had been suspended from her position. By midnight, the company's legal department had implied criminal exposure. By 1, Kai-di had arrived. He entered with Rain still clinging to his coat. An Yen took one step toward him, not because she believed he could solve everything, but because she still believed he knew who she was. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them I would never do this." His face was tired, strained, too carefully controlled. He glanced at Kang Fong, then back at her. "The situation is serious. Don't fight everyone right now." She stared at him. "That is your answer?" "I'm trying to keep this from getting worse." "For whom?" He did not answer. That silence was the first true betrayal. It was not loud, it did not even look cruel, but it left a mark deeper than shouting would have. She left the building close to 2 in the morning with her wedding necklace still unopened in her bag and the rain soaking through the sleeves of her blouse. On the way home she called her father again and again. He did not answer. By the time she reached the alley, neighbors had already gathered in front of the house. Someone had pushed him down the stairs. At the hospital, his body seemed suddenly too small under the white sheet. Machines breathed around him. His right hand twitched once when she took it. He forced his eyes open with tremendous effort. She bent until her ear almost touched his mouth. "Green ledger," he whispered. "Don't trust Dwi." The monitor stuttered into a frantic rhythm. Doctors and nurses rushed in, pulling her back. She stood outside the room, one palm pressed against the closed door, listening to clipped commands and metal wheels and the terrible discipline of people trying to keep a life from slipping away. Dawn reached the end of the corridor in a pale line. The rainy night before her wedding ended with a cry that never fully left her throat. Chapter 2. The Slap in the Wedding Hall. At 10 the next morning, the Hongvan Hotel still glittered as if the previous night had never happened. Flowers spilled across the entrance. Their enlarged wedding photograph stood in the center of the lobby. Her in white, leaning gently against Kai-du's shoulder, smiling with a softness that now felt like something belonging to another woman. Guests murmured the moment they saw her walk in. News from the company had spread faster than any invitation. On stage, Kai-du stood with his mother, several senior executives from Theng Tin and Ta Kang Fong, who wore the same immaculate expression as always. He looked like a man greeting investors, not someone who had helped bury a person alive beneath accusation. Kai-ju descended a few steps. "You shouldn't be here." The exhaustion of the night stripped away the last of her restraint. "I should not be here? They framed me. My father is in intensive care, and you are standing under wedding lights." A hush traveled through the hall. Kang Fong stepped forward with exquisite politeness. "Ms. Ha, this is not the place to discuss a corporate investigation." She looked at him and understood something with absolute clarity. Men like him survived because they trusted everyone else to care more about decorum than truth. "This is exactly the place, because you were happy to let this hall witness my ruin." Someone in the audience raised a phone. Someone else whispered that she had lost her mind. Kai-du lowered his voice. "An Yen, stop now. We can speak privately." "You had all night to speak privately." His mother, pale with anger and embarrassment, said, "The ceremony is over." "No, the lie is over." She stepped onto the stage. Before anyone could stop her, she turned to the guests and said clearly, "I did not steal anything. The bidding files were planted on my computer. The people standing behind me know it." The first slap landed from the side. It came from Kai-ju's mother, hard, swift, and shocking more for what it meant than for how much it hurt. Gasps broke across the hall. Heat rushed to An Yen's face. She tasted metal at the corner of her mouth and did not raise a hand in return. "This is what you bring to our family? Disgrace?" She slowly turned back. "No, your son brought that long before I did." The room cracked open into noise. Security moved. Kang Fong spoke to someone near the aisle. Kai-du reached for her wrist, but she shook him off. "If my father dies, then whatever is left of me will never let you live in peace again." There are moments when humiliation burns so cleanly that it stops feeling like shame and hardens into purpose. That morning was one of them. She walked out of the wedding hall with mascara untouched, dress absent, and every illusion torn away. At the hospital, she learned that her father had survived the night, but had suffered severe trauma. He drifted in and out without coherence. The police recorded statements, but even their questions carried a fatal laziness, as if the answer had already been decided somewhere above them. A domestic fall, an unfortunate coincidence, a company investigation unrelated to the incident. By evening, her suspension became termination. A notice from the company implied loss of trust, possible damages, and referral to authorities if further evidence appeared. Friends stopped answering messages. The landlord hinted that trouble around the house might create issues for other tenants. An Yen sat on a plastic chair in the hospital corridor with her bag in her lap and understood that ruin did not happen all at once. It happened administratively, socially, politely. That was when a woman in a dark coat sat beside her. "I knew your father," the woman said. An Yen turned. The stranger was elegant, even in fatigue, probably in her 60s, with the controlled bearing of someone who had once been feared in boardrooms and had not entirely forgotten how power moved. "Who are you?" Hung Vun Thu. The name was known in financial circles, a founder who had withdrawn years ago from the market after heart trouble. Why she was sitting in a public hospital corridor beside a disgraced former employee made no immediate sense. "Your father once sent me a file he was too frightened to keep only for himself," Vun Thu said. "He told me that if anything happened to him, I should watch over his daughter if I could." An Yen stared at her. "What file?" "Not here." The older woman looked down the corridor before continuing. "You are being erased. That means the truth you are standing near is bigger than a single tender file. If you stay visible right now, they will finish what they started. I'm not running. This is not running. It is surviving long enough to return with teeth." Later that night, after one more failed attempt to get honest answers and one more look at her father's bandaged body, An Yen sat in the dim hospital stairwell with the small green ledger Vun Thu had placed in her hands. It contained handwritten numbers, coded initials, unexplained transfers, and dates that intersected with Ming Jiang. At the back, in her father's writing, was a single sentence: "If this reaches An Yen, she must disappear before they decide she has seen too much." She closed the book and held it against her chest. Vun Thu arranged everything quickly. A transfer for her father to a more secure facility under legal observation, temporary shelter, new documents, a route out of the city that did not pass through obvious checkpoints. The speed of it terrified An Yen because it revealed how prepared the older woman had been for something like this. "Go far enough that they believe you are gone," Vun Thu said. An Yen looked at the bruises on her own wrist from where Kai Ju had grabbed her in the wedding hall. "And then what?" "Then you come back." "For what?" She lifted the green ledger. "To make each of them pay the price they deserve." That night, the city still hummed beneath the rain. Somewhere inside it, a wedding banquet ended under damaged flowers and whispering guests. Somewhere else, a daughter left her old name behind and carried her grief into the dark like a blade she had not yet learned to use. Chapter 3. 5 Years and Another Name. 5 years later, the city was still crowded with glass towers and promises poured in concrete. Only Ha An Yen no longer existed there. On paper, she had died in a train accident near the border. A brief local notice, a half-column of text, enough to close the life of a disgraced former employee without inviting questions. For the people who had wanted her gone, it was the neatest possible ending. But in London, under the name Tan Lam, she had learned how to live again without ever forgetting what she had been built from. Hun Van Thu spent much of what remained of her influence placing the younger woman abroad. There, An Yen studied risk management, financial compliance, forensic accounting, and the art of entering a room without revealing what she felt. Van Thu taught her more than any university ever could. She taught her how to hear lies hidden between numbers, how to survive meetings where everyone smiled and nobody spoke plainly, how to conceal rage until it became useful. Revenge taken in panic, she said, was only self-destruction wearing finer clothes. 5 years also changed An Yen's face in subtler ways. She did not become unrecognizable, she became harder to read. The softness people once mistook for harmlessness was gone. In its place was composure sharpened by discipline, grief, and the private knowledge that she had already died once and come back under administrative fiction. When Bak Ha Capital announced its strategic expansion into the domestic real estate sector, no one inside Ta Min Group paid much attention to the name of the lead representative at first. They saw credentials, foreign experience, clean language, and a woman whose profile suggested sophistication rather than threat.
By the time Ta Kang-fong realized he was looking at someone unusually dangerous, he had already sent the invitation. The meeting took place on the 32nd floor of Ta Ming's headquarters. Kang-fong greeted her as if he had been born in front of cameras. He was still handsome, still polished, still carrying his confidence like an expensive watch. Time had refined him, but not deepened him. Men like him did not grow inward, they only became more practiced surfaces. "Miss Tan," he said, extending a hand, "we're honored." She smiled with the exact level of warmth a strategic investor should offer. The honor depends on the numbers. His laugh came immediately. Good, she thought. Predictable men still mistook composure for invitation. Hai Dui was there too, standing near a display model of the company's new flagship development, Tien Kang Riverside. He had changed more visibly than Kang Fong. His face was leaner now, his silence less elegant and more burdened. For a fraction of a second, when his eyes met hers, something flashed there, a shock too quick for anyone else to catch. Then it vanished. He did not know her, not fully, but some part of him felt the tremor. A third man drew her attention before the meeting ended. Wien Ming Quan, head of legal and compliance liaison, had the restrained watchfulness of someone who had spent too long inside systems he did not entirely trust. Unlike the others, he did not hurry to charm her. He observed. When the meeting moved into discussion of Tien Kang Riverside, she listened more than she spoke. The project was massive, riverfront, prestigious, aggressively marketed. It was exactly the sort of development that demanded both public admiration and private concealment. She asked the right questions, withheld the most dangerous ones, and let them think she cared primarily about financing mechanisms, contractor exposure, and transparency safeguards. Kang Fong leaned forward. "If Baka becomes our strategic partner, we can offer complete access to due diligence." That sentence almost made her smile. Complete access, in the mouths of men like him, usually meant complete access to the parts they had already polished. Still, she accepted the formal invitation to review the project. That was step one. Make them invite her inside. After the meeting, as she crossed the lobby toward her car, someone called after her, "Miss Tan." She turned. Min Kun had followed her out, keeping a professionally respectful distance. "Your questions in there," he said, "were more specific than most investors ask on a first meeting." "Should I apologize for competence?" "No." A faint line appeared at the corner of his mouth. "I'm trying to decide whether to be relieved or worried." "And what have you decided?" "Not yet." For a second, the air between them changed. Not intimate, not soft, merely alert. She recognized something in him, the fatigue of a person who had remained standing inside a structure that no longer deserved his loyalty. "My concern," he said, "is Tien Kang is the kind of project people either profit from or get buried under." She held his gaze. "And which side are you on, Mr. Nguyen?" He did not answer directly. "That depends on who is asking." By the time she got into the car, the city lights were smearing across the tinted windows. She watched Min Kun remain on the pavement for a moment longer, as if he were measuring a possibility he did not yet trust. His gaze did not frighten her. It only stirred an old, unwanted ripple beneath the armor she had spent 5 years building. On a battlefield like this, the most dangerous person was not always the declared enemy. Sometimes it was the one capable of seeing through a mask before you were ready to remove it. That night, she opened her laptop and created a new folder, Tien Kang. On the first line of her work log, she typed, "Step 1, make them invite me in." She had already completed it. Chapter 4. The Invitation into the Wolf's Den. Tien Kang Riverside stood on the eastern bank of the city, where old riverfront land had been sealed behind high metal fencing and billboards promising a superior way of life. Live close to nature. Reach a new standard. The slogan printed along the entrance road was so glossy that it almost made An Yen laugh. Places that advertised standards most loudly were often built on concealed rot. Kai Jui personally led the site tour. Several project assistants, a technical director, and an internal filming team trailed behind them to capture images of the prestigious strategic partner from Baka Capital. Kang Fong appeared only briefly at the beginning, delivered a few polished remarks about transparency and long-term vision, then disappeared under the excuse of a banking meeting. He liked to leave other people standing near the danger. From the 18th floor of a model tower still under construction, An Yen looked down at concrete mixers moving in and out below. The river wind snapped at the green safety screens tied around the building.
Kaijui stood beside her, speaking in the level tone of a man giving a professional presentation to any other investor. "You haven't changed your habit of checking every detail twice," he said at one point, too casually. She did not turn her head. "And you haven't changed your habit of pretending a sentence means less than it does." Something in his expression tightened. "Have we met before?" "That depends. Do you often forget the faces of people whose lives were ruined near you?" He went still. The filming team moved ahead. For one private moment they stood in the raw wind between unfinished walls and hanging cables, the city spread out below like a place that had never once rewarded honesty. "You are not who you say you are," he said quietly. "Neither are you." His hands curled once at his sides. "If you came here for revenge, be careful. Kaifeng is more dangerous now than he was back then." "Back then?" His silence answered for him. The rest of the tour continued under the smooth surface of logistics, financing, material procurement, projected sales, and completion schedules. She noted every hesitation, every mismatched figure, every over-explained answer. By the time she returned to the temporary site office, she was certain the project's paperwork contained more than ordinary cosmetic fraud. That suspicion became proof by accident, or the kind of accident that only occurs when a system is straining under too many hidden weights. A junior technician forgot to lock a backup workstation before leaving to deal with a phone call. On the screen was a folder labeled with a dull internal code. An Yen crossed the room, glanced once toward the door, and clicked. Most of the files were technical logs, boring by design. One audio clip sat among them with a recent date stamp. An Yen copied it to a secure device in the space of 3 breaths. That night in her apartment, she played the file through headphones. At first, it was mostly background noise, a door closing, a rustle of fabric, someone breathing too quickly. Then Kaifeng's voice emerged, low and controlled. "You're forgetting what I paid to protect you." Another voice answered, a woman's voice, trembling even while trying to stay composed. "I did what you told me." "Then keep doing it. If Baka starts digging, you know what happens." The clip ended abruptly. An Yen replayed it several times. It was not just the words, it was the breath between them, the way the woman swallowed the end of her sentences, the fear pressed down beneath practiced politeness. In that instant, a name rose through her with terrible clarity. 2V. She sat very still for a long time. 5 years had passed, but betrayal had its own way of preserving shape. She opened a new document and typed one sentence. Step 2. Fracture the old alliance. If you want to bring down a wall, you begin by making the bricks distrust one another. Chapter 5. The Woman in the Red Dress. 3 days later, at the launch event for a scholarship foundation sponsored by Tom Min Group, An Yen arrived in a dark red dress, vivid enough that no one in the ballroom could pretend not to see her. The event was held on the top floor of a 5-star hotel, bathed in camera flashes, speeches about social responsibility, and expensive sincerity. Kaifeng worked the room with effortless fluency. He could have sold virtue itself if there'd been a margin in it. 5 years had transformed 2V into a glossier version of herself. Her hair fell in deliberate softness. A jade-faced watch rested at her wrist. Her smile appeared at the exact angle expected of a woman who ran charitable initiatives for a powerful corporate family. But when her eyes landed on An Yen, a small amount of color left her face. No one else would have noticed. An Yen did. She approached with a champagne glass in hand and let their stems touch lightly, the way 2 elegant strangers might greet one another. "Miss Lei, right?" An Yen said. "I've heard you run the foundation beautifully." 2V answered just quickly enough to reveal strain. "You're kind. I also heard you're very loyal." For half a second, 2V's smile stopped living in her eyes. "In our line of work, loyalty matters." "It depends," An Yen said, "on what it is bought with." The music hid the sharpness of the words from anyone more than a step away. 2V looked at her fully then, suspicion and fear colliding behind discipline. "Have we met?" "Not officially." The conversation ended when Kaifeng joined them, one hand easy in his pocket, his expression warm enough to photograph well. He complimented the foundation's mission, the city's youth, the promise of public-private partnership. An Yen responded exactly as a poised investor should. While inside, she counted every movement, every glance shared between him and 2V, every invisible line of pressure. The strike came later that evening. a financial blogger known for industry gossip, published a short post questioning irregular donations routed through the foundation's vendor network. It named nothing directly, proved nothing conclusively, and yet the market reacted like dry paper near a spark. Ta Min's stock dipped the next morning. Comment threads multiplied. Anonymous sources began whispering that the group's charitable branch existed less to help students than to circulate money cleanly with prettier language. By noon, Confong was furious. By evening, he and 2V had a private argument in an underground parking level where they thought no one would be near enough to matter. An Yen had timed it carefully.
She entered the basement just as 2V's voice rose in a strained whisper. "I handled everything you gave me." "And now people are talking," Kang Fong replied. "You think I'm the leak?" "I think frightened people become inconvenient." He grabbed 2V's arm, not brutally, not in a way that would leave easy evidence, but with the ownership of a man certain that fear had already done most of the work for him. "Let go of her," another voice said. Both of them turned. Min Kun stood a few meters away, folder in hand, expression flat. Kang Fong released 2V immediately and rearranged his face into annoyance rather than threat. "You should learn to knock, Kun. This is a parking garage, not a private residence." The moment dissolved outward. 2V pulled herself together. Kang Fong laughed once without humor, and all three of them walked away with their masks back in place. But An Yen, hidden beyond a concrete pillar, had seen what she needed. The first crack had formed. When she reached her car, Min Kun was waiting by the driver's side, as if he had known she was somewhere nearby all along. "You set that off," he said. She did not bother denying it. "Do you object?" "I haven't decided." "Then why are you here?" He handed her a thin file. Inside were internal notes about vendor discrepancies, all carefully copied and deniably incomplete. Not enough to destroy anyone by themselves, enough to suggest intent. "You'll need someone who understands how the system is built from the inside," he said. She looked up slowly. "And why would you help me?" A muscle in his jaw shifted. "Because people like Kang Fong only become untouchable when everyone keeps telling themselves the timing is wrong." He did not ask her who she really was. He did not force any declaration she was not ready to give. Before leaving, he only added, "If you are going to bring them down, do it thoroughly. Half-truths are what they live on." She watched his car disappear up the spiral ramp. 5 years ago, she had lost everything because no one chose to stand beside her. 5 years later, as the board tilted, one of the people who had once remained silent was now stepping toward her. But she knew better than to confuse movement with trust. On a board like this, trust was always the most expensive piece. Chapter 6. The First Crack. Ta Ming's stock had barely steadied before Teen Kang Riverside took another hit. A video shot on a worker's phone surfaced online, showing a section of concrete in an auxiliary block crumbling open to expose badly embedded steel only hours after the formwork was removed. The clip spread quickly enough that major outlets could not ignore it. Reporters began asking about material quality, site supervision, and whether investor disclosures had concealed construction risks. Inside the top-floor meeting room at Ta Ming headquarters, Kang Fong threw a stack of documents onto the table, hard enough to scatter them. Who leaked the video? His assistant went pale. The technical director did not raise his head. Kai Yu sat near the far end of the table, face set in controlled stillness. But An Yen could see the pressure closing around him from every side: timeline, quality, financing, media, and the suspicion that Kang Fong was already deciding how much blame to place on other shoulders. When the emergency session ended, Kai Yu asked to speak to her alone. They met in a corridor lined with framed renderings of apartments no one had yet lived in. "You're forcing everything to break at once," he said. "Did you imagine it could stay whole forever?" His eyes were bloodshot from too little sleep. "There are workers on that site, buyers, staff who don't even know what they're standing inside. Then perhaps the people who built the lie should have thought of them first." He closed his eyes for a second. "You really are An Yen." This time she did not deny it. The name changed the air between them. He looked at her as if 5 years were trying to collapse into a single instant and failing. Regret did not soften his face, it hollowed it. "I never stopped looking for a way to fix it," he said. "You had a way 5 years ago. It was called telling the truth." He had no answer to that. Few people ever did when confronted not with accusation, but the exact moment they had chosen themselves over what was right. That same evening, Min Quan brought news of an old security guard from the original Min Zhang office who had suffered an unexplained injury shortly after An Yen's collapse from grace. He was alive, retired, and living quietly on the city's edge. The timing was not random.
Someone paid him to forget something, Min Quan said. Or to remember the wrong version, An Yen replied. They drove there together under low evening clouds. The old guard opened the door only after checking through the peephole twice. He was wary, poor, and carrying the permanent flinch of someone who had once understood how cheap his safety really was. At first he said nothing useful. Then An Yen placed the silver USB drive from that night on the table between them, the one Vun Tu had recovered years earlier through channels she never fully explained. The guard stared at it and went gray. "I never touched her computer," he whispered. "I only changed the hallway camera records." "Who ordered it?" He looked as though saying the name aloud might still cost him his remaining years. "The vice president's office, but the architect knew. He was there that night." The words did not wound her because they were new. They wounded her because some part of her had spent 5 years still hoping they might not be true in full. On the drive back, she said little. Min Quan did not fill the silence. That restraint did more for her than comfort would have. "Tomorrow," she said at last, "I'm going back to my old house." "To look for the green ledger?" She glanced at him. "How do you know about it?" "Because people who spend years surviving do not return with empty hands." There was no arrogance in the sentence, only recognition. "I'm coming with you," he said. She nearly refused on instinct. Then she thought of the house at the end of the alley, the dust, the old ghosts, and the possibility that what remained there might finally open the whole buried structure beneath the scandal. "All right," she said. "Sometimes the first crack appears not in the enemy's wall, but in the armor you have worn for too many years." Chapter 7. The Old House and the Iron Box. The alley seemed smaller than An Yen remembered. Or perhaps after 5 years of wide roads, airports, hotels, and boardrooms, narrow places simply looked more fragile. Her old house sat at the very end, locked behind dust and a faded notice from the ward office. Min Quan stood just behind her, saying little. He only helped lift the rusted metal gate enough for the old key to turn. When the door opened, stale air rushed out carrying the smell of damp wood, dust, and something like forgotten affection. Most of the furniture remained where it had always been, the low table, the sagging bookshelf, the fan her father had repaired too many times to count. A water stain still spread across the wall from a monsoon long ago. She stood in the center of the room and could not breathe for several seconds. She remembered the last dinner they had eaten there. Her father spooning soup into his bowl, telling her to finish the wedding and then slow down for a few days. The ordinary tenderness of that memory hurt more than the dramatic ones. Tragedy rarely takes only the exceptional moments. It steals the small domestic ones, too. They searched carefully. The iron box turned up beneath a false board under her father's old desk, wrapped in oilcloth, heavy with paper. Inside were copies of expense ledgers, transfer slips, email printouts, and handwritten notes cross-referencing shell vendors with material orders. There were also names. Enough names to show that Ming Jiang had not been one act of corruption, but part of a longer network connecting fake bids, laundered project costs, controlled vendors, and intimidation. At the very bottom lay the green ledger. Her father's handwriting filled it in compact lines. Dates, amounts, initials, side notes about who was pressured, who was paid off, who signed after receiving hospital support for relatives, who disappeared from meetings after objecting. On one page, underlined twice, were 2 words, Ding Lan, her mother. An Yen's hands shook so badly that Min Quan had to steady the open book before the pages bent. "Why would your mother's name be here?" "I don't know," she said, "but if my father wrote it down, then her accident was never only an accident." There are revelations that explode, and there are revelations that quietly rearrange the architecture of your entire life. This was the second kind. By evening, they had photographed and cataloged everything. Min Quan contacted a digital forensic specialist through a channel he trusted. Agnes sent a secure message to Nak Ha, an investigative journalist known for refusing easy payoffs and for surviving long enough in her field to understand both risk and timing. "I have evidence," she wrote,
Not for a loud scandal that burns for 2 days and disappears. For the full structure. Nakha replied with 4 words, "I'm waiting for orders." Onion looked at the open iron box, then at the green ledger in her lap. For years she had imagined revenge as an explosion. Now she understood that truth, if used properly, could be far more devastating when released in layers. Let them deny one thing, then another, until denial itself became proof. "I have enough to break them," Min Kwon said quietly. "I have more than enough, but I want the whole truth, not a blast that sinks afterward." Outside, evening gathered over the alley. Inside, dust moved slowly through a shaft of light, as if the room had been holding its breath for 5 years and was only now exhaling. The iron box her father had hidden was open. From this point forward, no one would be able to stuff the truth back into darkness again. Chapter 8. 2V's Last Thread. 2V disappeared for 2 days. Her phone was off. Her email went unanswered. Security increased around the luxury apartment she shared with Kang Fong, and that alone told Onion that something inside his circle had started to rot. He was the kind of man who would discard anyone the moment they became a liability, especially if that person knew where his hands had been. On the 3rd evening, an unfamiliar number called Onyen's phone. The voice belonged to an older housekeeper who had once worked in one of the Ta family properties and who vaguely remembered her father from an accounting handoff years ago. "Miss Lei told me to find you," the woman whispered. "She's not at the penthouse. They moved her to the family house in Fu Lok. She says if anyone can get her out, it's you." Onion almost laughed at the bitterness of that. 5 years earlier, 2V had helped push her into the fire. Now, when the heat turned, she reached for the same person she had betrayed. Still, Onion went. She, Min Kwon, and one trusted operative from Van Thu's network drove to the Riverside Villa district that night. The Ta family property sat behind trees and surveillance cameras. They could not simply break in. Min Kwon contacted an administrative inspection team under the pretext of a disturbance complaint and suspected unlawful confinement. It was a narrow legal path, but enough to open the gate if timed well. When officials entered, 2V was found upstairs in a locked room. She was not tied. She did not need to be. Fear can confine the body more efficiently than rope. Her face carried the strain of sleeplessness. The watch at her wrist was gone. So was the polished assurance she had worn on public events. For the first time in years, she looked her age. When she saw Onion, her mouth trembled once before she forced it still. "You came." "I almost didn't." That would have been fair. The truth between them had no softness. Later, in a secure apartment arranged by Van Fu, 2V began speaking in stops and starts that gradually lengthened into confession. She admitted that 5 years earlier, Kang Fong had approached her through debt, opportunity, and the oldest poison of all, comparison. He had told her Onion would marry well, move upward, leave everyone else behind. He had suggested that loyalty to him would secure 2V a future of her own. Then he had made participation sound smaller than it was. Carry a message, enter a room, say what you saw, repeat a version of events already decided by stronger people. "I told myself I wasn't destroying you," she said, eyes fixed on the table. "I told myself they would only push you out of the company. I didn't know about your father." Onyen's voice was calm enough to hurt. "You didn't need to know everything to know it was wrong." Tears stood in 2V's eyes but did not fall. Perhaps she had exhausted easy crying long ago. "I know." Piece by piece, she handed over what she had hidden. Encrypted chats, payment records routed through charity accounts, screenshots of instructions from Kang Fong, and one voice message in which he said plainly that a witness who changes her story becomes a problem that solves itself. It was not enough by itself for a courtroom victory. It was enough to destroy his posture of innocence. "And Kaizui?" Onion asked. 2V closed her eyes. "He knew after it started. Maybe before all of it, maybe not. I never heard him order anything, but he didn't stop it. Later he tried to shield you in small ways that changed nothing." That answer felt tragically correct. When the documents had all been transferred, 2V finally lifted her gaze. "I don't expect forgiveness. You won't get it." A broken laugh left 2V's throat. "I know." For the first time, Onion looked at her and did not see only betrayal. She still saw it, sharp and irreversible, But she also saw a human being who had spent years locking herself inside a gilded cage and was only now willing to bloody her hands on the wall. Too late, perhaps, but not entirely without meaning. "I'll give testimony, even if he destroys what's left of me." Anyan answered after a long pause. "What's left of you has already been destroyed by silence. Testimony is the first honest thing you've done." The last thread binding 2V to Kang Fong snapped that night, and when the person closest to a secret turns away, darkness begins to sound different. It starts to crack. Chapter 9. The Woman Who Slept for 13 Years. Hong Kong Private Hospital sat deep inside a green, quiet compound, tranquil enough to resemble a retreat more than a place of treatment. That false serenity irritated An Yin the moment she stepped through the gate. Some of the dirtiest truths she had learned were stored in the cleanest buildings. With emergency authorization arranged through legal counsel and a valid intervention from supervisory authorities, they gained access to the records of a long-term patient registered under the name Yuan Lan. The department head tried at first to evade and delay. His tone changed the instant Ming Quan mentioned possible identity fraud and unlawful confinement of a patient without proper guardianship. When the file photo appeared, pain tightened across An Yin's chest so sharply she nearly lost balance. Though thinner, older, and streaked with gray, the woman in the record was unmistakably her mother, Ding Lan, the woman An Yin had been taught to mourn without proof. The medical file was a maze of manipulated history. A traffic accident 13 years earlier, extended coma, cognitive trauma, a guardian arrangement managed through a charitable health fund tied through several layers of paperwork to entities adjacent to Ta Ming. Visits limited, identity altered for privacy, no legitimate family tracing completed. Every page was written to look plausible in isolation. Together, they smelled like engineered disappearance. When they entered the room, her mother lay near a sunlit window, fragile as if time had been using her body with withholding the rest of her life. An Yin stood at the bedside with both hands clenched and could not say "Mom" at first. The word was too large, too impossible. Her mother's eyelids fluttered at the sound of her voice. Recovery did not happen like miracles in films. It came in flickers, confusion, fear, small recognitions that vanished and then returned. Over days, under better care and legal protection, memories surfaced in fragments. A night road, headlights, a passenger she had recognized before impact, men speaking after the crash, one of them saying that if she woke fully, all the books would open. She remembered trying to tell someone about the financial records she had once seen through her work for a supplier connected to Ta family projects. Then darkness, then years of blurred ceilings and half-dreams. Her father had searched for her. That truth came out too. He had followed paperwork trails until he frightened the wrong people. When he got too close, they neutralized him through fear, surveillance, and eventually violence. The room blurred as An Yin listened. The story she had spent half her life living inside was larger than personal betrayal. Her family had not merely been unlucky, they had been dismantled. One evening, after a difficult therapy session, her mother asked weakly, "Did your father wait?" An Yin swallowed before answering. "He did, as long as he could." Her mother closed her eyes, and the grief in that motion was older than speech. Later, outside in the corridor, Min Quan handed An Yin a cup of untouched tea and stood beside her without pressing words into the space. "My sister died because of a concealed building defect 10 years ago," he said at last. "Different company, same kind of people. After that, I joined systems like this because I thought proximity might let me stop something one day. Mostly it just taught me how much silence costs." She had not known that. For the first time, they looked at each other not merely as temporary allies, but as two people cut apart by structures that protected profit over human life. Pain does not create love, but it can create a form of understanding that arrives before language. That night, An Yin opened an old photo of her parents taken in a park when she was 7, her father smiling gently, her mother holding her hand, little An Yin staring somewhere off camera with ice cream on her chin. She pressed the phone against her forehead and whispered, "I found Mom. I'll bring Dad back through the truth." The woman who had slept for 13 years had awakened. From that moment on, this was no longer just a battle between one betrayed woman and the people who had wronged her. It was an attempt to reclaim an entire family stolen by lies. Chapter 10. The Man Standing Between Two Shores. Kai Zui came to Bakha capital on a Monday morning without an appointment. He wore a gray shirt without a tie. There were shadows under his eyes, and the past few weeks had aged him more effectively than time had managed in the previous 5 years. The receptionist called upstairs to ask whether he should be sent away. An Yen looked through the glass wall of her office and saw him standing alone in the waiting area, shoulders straight with the effort of not collapsing in public. She told them to let him up. The moment the door closed behind him, he said, "I'm sorry." It was too small a sentence for 5 years. It was also the first honest one she had heard from him in a very long time. "For what?" she asked. "For failing me? For choosing yourself? For standing on that stage while I was buried? Or for the years in between when silence was more comfortable than truth?" His face tightened with each question. "For all of it." "Then you're short by about 1,000 words." He did not defend himself. Instead, perhaps because he sensed defense would only further cheapen what remained of his dignity, he began to tell the truth piece by piece. He admitted that Kang Feng had involved him in irregular procurement and hidden adjustments long before Min Zhang. At first, it had come disguised as minor flexibility, the sort of ethical compromise many ambitious people persuade themselves is temporary. Later, it escalated. By the time the bidding file was planted, Kai Zui understood enough to know An Yen was being set up. He also knew that objecting openly would expose his own participation and crush his family, who depended on money and medical care he had come to finance through increasingly compromised success. "So you let me burn," An Yen said. He closed his eyes. "Yes." The nakedness of that answer almost undid her more than excuses would have. There was nothing romantic in remorse once damage had become irreversible. Only weight. He slid a flash drive across her desk. "This contains design revisions, internal approvals, backdated sign-offs, and server routes, enough to connect Kang Feng directly to concealed material substitutions and to show who cleaned the records." "You think this redeems you?" "No." "Then why bring it?" "Because I'm done helping evil survive by increments." The room stayed quiet for several seconds. Then she asked the question that mattered most. "Why now?"
His laugh was brief and bitter. "Because watching you stand in front of them without fear made me see what kind of man I became, and because some structures collapse only when someone inside accepts being buried with them." After he left, Min Kwon entered from the adjacent office. He had clearly heard enough to understand what had passed. "Do you believe him?" he asked. "I believe guilt," she said. "That isn't the same thing as trust." He nodded. "Good." She studied him. "You sound disappointed and relieved at the same time." "I am." He hesitated, then added, "People who failed once can still do the right thing later, but the right thing later does not erase the first failure." "No," she said, "it doesn't." They drove to the rehabilitation center for her mother that evening. On the way back, city lights reflected off the windshield in soft streaks. An Yen said suddenly, "What is left after revenge?" Min Kwon kept his eyes on the road for a while before answering. "Future." "That sounds too simple." "It isn't. The hard part is believing you are allowed to have one." His words stayed with her long after he dropped her off. For 5 years, she had lived only to return. Now that the day of return had nearly run its course, she realized she had almost never imagined the far shore beyond vengeance. Maybe that was why Min Kwon always seemed like a man standing between two worlds, one foot inside the system, one outside its logic, refusing to let either fully define him. He once watched her fall. Now he was choosing to walk with her through the wreckage. Trust did not return all at once. It came back slowly, the way dawn thins the dark before anyone can point to the exact second night stops ruling the sky. Chapter 11. The Merciless Press Conference. Ngokha's first investigative article went live on Thursday morning at 7. Its headline was restrained enough to avoid immediate suppression, but the content beneath it hooked deep. From scholarship fund to Riverside Project, questions around Ta Min's money trails. Within 2 hours, the article had spread across financial forums, industry groups, and social platforms. It did not rely on one explosive accusation. It mapped patterns. That was more dangerous. At 9, the Department of Construction announced an emergency inspection of Tien Keng Riverside. At 10, Baka Capital issued a formal notice suspending all investment negotiations pending transparency review. At 11, Ta Men called a press conference to respond to misleading information affecting market confidence. An Yan knew then that they had been pushed to the edge. The conference room was packed. Cameras lined the back. Reporters checked their feeds in low, quick motions. Kang Fong entered first, still handsome enough to look composed from a distance, though the cracks now lived at the corners of his mouth. Kai Dui arrived later under subpoena arrangement, not as an honored executive, but as a cooperating witness in waiting. Tu V sat off to the side in a plain suit, stripped of ornamental roll and spectacle. An Yan entered only after the statements had begun. Kang Fong was in the middle of a polished denial about temporary accounting misunderstandings when the murmur in the room shifted. He looked up. For the first time in public, his expression failed him. An Yan walked to the front with the calm of someone who had already lost everything once and therefore could no longer be frightened by humiliation. Min Quan followed carrying document cases. Ngok Ha remained in the media section, eyes sharp and unsentimental. This was no theater for attention, it was a controlled detonation. "My name," An Yan said into the microphone, "is Ha An Yan." The room detonated in sound. Cameras rose, questions flew. Kang Fong actually stepped back. In that instant, he looked not like a strategist, but like a man seeing his own ghost refuse to remain buried. "I was framed 5 years ago in connection with the Min Zhang bidding file," she continued, voice steady. "The same network that destroyed my name has continued to launder costs, substitute materials, pressure witnesses, conceal identity, and manipulate records across multiple projects tied to Ta Min." "Absurd," Kang Fong snapped, but the old smoothness was gone. She lifted the photocopied green ledger first, then placed it beside the original supporting files, transfer histories, emails, audio records, forensic reports, vendor maps, server logs, medical documents, and corroborating witness statements. "This is what I have," she said. "The rest is still in sealed servers, in the memory of witnesses, and in the conscience of people who once chose silence." One by one, the walls closed in. Min Quan explained compliance irregularities with legal precision. Naka cited her publication's independent verification chain. Tu V, visibly trembling but unflinching, confirmed coercive instructions routed through charity accounts. Kai Yu admitted to knowledge, concealment, and backdated technical approvals. Then came the most devastating revelation of all. Records proving that Xinglan, An Yan's mother, had been kept under a false identity after an accident linked to supplier disputes over financial evidence. Every camera in the room turned toward Kang Fong. He tried once more to speak the language of conspiracy and misunderstanding, but the grammar of power had abandoned him. His perfect face, once so marketable, finally split under the strain of public fact. No blood was spilled in that press room in the literal sense, nobody died on the spot, and yet an empire built on polished cruelty and managed deception had begun to bleed in full view of the public. There are collapses that happen with fire. There are others that begin with documents laid carefully in a row beneath fluorescent light. This was the second kind. Chapter 12. The Flood After the Door Opened. After the press conference, events moved with the force of a burst dam. Mainstream media, digital newspapers, industry forums, investors, apartment buyers, and state regulators all turned at once toward Min. Economic investigators moved in alongside construction inspectors. Servers were sealed, accounts were frozen. Emergency reviews hit ongoing projects. Lawyers began rearranging loyalties at astonishing speed. The public spectacle was enormous. And inside that chaos, danger increased. People cornered by loss often become most reckless when they realize nothing respectable remains to preserve. The night after the press conference, while returning from her mother's rehabilitation facility, An Yan's car was followed by an unfamiliar pickup truck. Min Quan was driving that evening. He noticed the pattern immediately, diverted into a busier route, and alerted a support team. The pickup tried twice to force them toward the edge of an overpass before breaking away at the sight of approaching headlights. "Kang Fong," An Yan said. "Or someone trying to prove usefulness to him," Min Quan replied. By dawn, police issued a detention order. Kang Fong did not go quietly. When investigators moved on one of the riverside warehouses tied to Shell procurement channels, he attempted to flee through a service exit.
Kai Jui, who had been brought in under protection for an additional statement, crossed the path at the wrong, or perhaps exactly the necessary moment. The confrontation was brief, ugly, and stripped of all old elegance. Kang Fong lunged. Kai Jui shoved an officer clear and took the impact of a metal bar across the shoulder. Security closed in seconds later. It was the first wholly unambiguous thing Kai Jui had done for someone other than himself in years. At the hospital, his injury was not life-threatening. He looked exhausted, pale, and strangely relieved. An Yen stood at the end of the bed for a while before speaking. "You should have moved." He gave a faint smile. "Probably. Was that supposed to change anything?" "No." His voice was rough. "Just one thing done without cowardice." There was no romance in the room, no miracle, only the difficult dignity of a man arriving late to his own conscience. Later, when the corridor outside fell quiet, he said, "If there were another life—" She stopped him gently before the sentence could become indulgence. "This one is enough." It was not a cruel answer. It was simply true. The flood that followed the opening door eventually carried away the man at the center of it all. But after any flood, what remains is always mud, broken brick, paperwork, and the long labor of rebuilding. Justice was never clean. It was administrative, emotional, partial, expensive, and painfully human. Still, it moved.
Chapter 13. The Trial of Those Who Chose Silence. The trial opened at the start of the following rainy season. By then, the city had stopped vibrating with the first shock, but every time the case was mentioned, people still remembered it as one of the most severe corporate scandals in years. The courtroom was packed with reporters, affected homebuyers, bank representatives, engineers, former employees, and people who had once believed that polished towers were signs of clean ambition. Ta Kang Fong sat behind the defendant's rail in prison-issued clothes, thinner now but still carrying the residue of arrogance forged over too many years of immunity. He faced multiple charges: financial manipulation, material fraud, witness coercion, suppression and distortion of evidence, involvement in the chain of events leading to Ha Van Kui's death, and illegal concealment linked to Ding Lan's identity and medical guardianship. Kai Zhu appeared as a witness, his shoulder still slightly stiff from the injury. He cooperated fully, describing how compromise had begun in increments and turned into willing assistance. No one in the courtroom tried to excuse him. No one needed to. His testimony was not for absolution. It was for completion, for giving the map of wrongdoing its final lines. Tu Vi testified too. Her voice shook but did not fail. Watching her, An Yen felt neither triumph nor forgiveness. Some wounds never become tender. They simply stop deciding your future. When An Yen herself took the stand, she did not perform grief for the room. She spoke with clean precision about the night of the theft accusation, the wedding hall, the years of disappearance, the recovery of the ledger, the discovery of her mother, and the evidence chain that had returned the case from rumor to fact. There was power in her restraint. People listened more closely because she did not beg to be believed. The judgment took hours to read. Kang Fong received the heaviest sentence. Several executives and intermediaries received prison terms, suspended terms, or lifetime professional bans, depending on role and degree of cooperation. Civil liability orders followed. Compensation funds were structured for affected buyers and families. Medical responsibility and identity restoration orders were formally entered for Ding Lan. The court stopped short of calling the system itself monstrous. Courts rarely used such language, but the evidence made the conclusion unavoidable anyway. Some weeks later, An Yen visited Kai Zhu once in detention before his transfer. He sat across the glass, looking older, as though vanity had finally lost the right to live on his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I used to think regret meant suffering enough to balance what I did." "It doesn't," she said. "I know." He looked at her with a steadiness he had not possessed when it mattered most. "Are you well?" It was a strange question, and perhaps the only decent one left between them. "I'm learning," she answered. He nodded once. "Good." The meeting ended quietly. When she walked out of the facility, she did not cry. A chapter had truly closed, not through romantic forgiveness, but through a clean cut made without turning back. The trial of those who chose silence concluded with sentences for each person, but the larger trial, the one inside each conscience, would continue far longer. Chapter 14. Dawn After the Debt. 1 year after the verdict, a pale 3-story building overlooking the eastern riverfront hung a new sign above its entrance. Van Quy Legal Support Center. In smaller letters beneath it, for workers and victims of civil and corporate fraud. This was what An Yen built with the lawful compensation she received and additional community funding that Van Thu contributed. She did not want her father's story to end as a case file, a sentence, and a few newspaper archives. If truth had once saved her from being buried alive, then this place would become a place where other people could still find a door before the ground closed over them. Her mother moved into the small repaired house with a vegetable trellis behind it, just as she had once liked. On better days, she cooked, watered plants, and told old stories out of sequence. On harder days, she rested with her head against her daughter's shoulder on the front porch. Pain still lived in their family, but it no longer drifted like an unnamed ghost through every room. Hyung Van Thu visited often, carrying medicine, legal gossip, and the dry affection of someone who had long ago forgotten how to present care in sentimental language. She still called An Yen reckless whenever a case grew too personal. An Yen still answered that caution and courage had never once been natural sisters. And Min Kun, he never arrived with dramatic declarations, he simply remained. In meetings, in late-night document reviews, in the legal center's first impossible weeks, in hospital corridors when old memories hit without warning, in quiet drives home after difficult testimonies from strangers whose stories reopened buried parts of their own. One evening, after the center had closed and the river was carrying the last light in broken gold along its surface, he stood beside her on the balcony. "It's strange," he said. "You spent years trying to return. Now this place feels like the first time you've actually arrived somewhere." She looked out at the water. Maybe survival and arrival are not the same thing. No, they aren't. A breeze lifted a loose strand of her hair. The city beyond them was still noisy, still unfair, still full of towers and promises and people who would learn too late what their silences cost. But it also held this, a building with her father's name, a mother who had opened her eyes again, and a future she had once believed belonged only to other people. She turned slightly toward him. "Why did you stay?" Min Kun took a breath, as if the honest version mattered enough to say carefully. "Because after watching you fight your way back from a grave they prepared for you, leaving would have felt like choosing the old world again." Her throat tightened, not with grief this time, but with the unfamiliar tenderness of being met without being handled. She did not answer with grand promises. She reached for his hand. That was enough. When dawn came the next morning, it spilled slowly across the legal center's white walls, across case files stacked for the day ahead, across the river, across the ordinary labor of lives being rebuilt. The debt of the past had not vanished. Some losses never vanished, but it no longer owned the shape of what came next. An Yen stood by the window and watched the city wake. This time, when she spoke her own name in the quiet of the room, it sounded like something returned, not to the past, but to herself. The end.
Hey there! If you enjoy our audio content, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Most importantly, click subscribe and ring the bell to stay updated with everything Zuzu Audio. Support the channel and join our community today.